My name is Frank Lawson, and I'm 56 years old. Born with calloused hands and a stubborn heart. Raised in the middle of Missouri, where the winters are long, the summers are loud. And a man's worth is measured by how he treats his family and how he keeps his word. I never imagined that after all the years I spent working double shifts, crawling under houses, fixing busted wiring, sweating through heat waves and freezing through cold snaps, just to give my daughter a better life, I would one day stand in the living room I built with these tired old hands and hear my own child, my little girl I once carried on my shoulders, look me dead in the eyes with a face I barely recognized and scream, "Get out of my house, Dad." And it wasn't just the words that gutted me, like a dull knife pushed slow and deep. It was the fire behind them. A fire that didn't belong to her. A fire that felt borrowed, planted, fed by the man who stood behind her with that smug, satisfied half grin, like he'd finally won something he never earned. In that split second, I realized something in my daughter had shifted so far from the sweet little kid who used to run across the yard yelling "Daddy" when I pulled into the driveway. And I knew that this wasn't her voice. This was someone else's poison, dripping through her every word. She forgot who built that home, board by board, paycheck by paycheck. She forgot who paid every mortgage bill on time, even when the economy tanked. She forgot who climbed onto the icy roof after a snowstorm to fix a leak at 3 in the morning. She forgot the nights I stayed up with her when she was sick, the school projects I helped with, the countless sacrifices I made silently, because that's what a father does. She forgot who raised her alone when her mother walked away. But I'll tell you, something she remembered real damn fast when the consequences finally hit. When the comfort she took for granted snapped away like a branch under too much weight. And this is the story of how my daughter betrayed me in a way I never thought possible. How she chose a stranger's influence over her own father. And how I didn't scream, didn't fight, didn't throw a single punch. No. I quietly, calmly, and deliberately turned the entire situation around until the very people who tried to push me out of the life I built ended up losing everything they thought they had. This isn't a story about anger. It's a story about patience. It's a story about watching people reveal themselves. And it's a story about how sometimes the sweetest revenge is simply letting the truth come crashing down on the ones who thought you were too old, too tired, or too soft to push back. They had no idea who they were messing with. Back then, before everything went sideways, life moved in this slow, predictable rhythm that felt almost comforting in its simplicity. I used to wake up before the sun even peeked over the fields, long before the birds started their morning chatter, and I'd shuffle into the kitchen with that familiar stiffness in my lower back, the kind of ache you earn after decades climbing ladders and lifting things heavier than you should have. I'd brew the same strong, dark coffee I'd been drinking since I was 22, the kind that smelled like burnt earth but tasted like survival. And I'd stand by the window holding that chipped mug my daughter made for me in 2nd grade, watching the sky change colors. Then I'd head out in my old pickup, the same truck I've had for years, the one that rattles when you hit 40 miles an hour and groans like a tired mule when it's cold, but still starts every time because it knows I depend on it. Being a senior electrician wasn't glamorous, but it was honest work. My hands were rough, my shoulders were scarred, my knees cracked every time I bent down, but my pride, solid, unbreakable, I wore it like a second skin. I built everything I had through sweat, real sweat, the kind that stings your eyes and soaks your shirt and makes you feel like you earned your place on this earth. I bought my house when I was 43, after years of patching up rentals and fixing other people's wiring disasters. The day I signed those papers, I felt the closest thing to winning a trophy I'd ever felt. That house wasn't fancy. Hell, the paint peeled every couple years because the Missouri weather doesn't care about your hard work, but it was mine. A two-story place with a porch swing I installed myself one late summer evening, a backyard big enough to grill for half the neighborhood, and windows that let sunlight pour in like warm honey. Every nail hammered into the walls, every leaky pipe I crawled under the house to fix, every bill paid on time even when money was tight. I handled all of it. That house was a reflection of who I was. Steady, strong, dependable, maybe a little worn down in places but still standing. When my daughter Emily finished college and asked if she could move back home for a while, I didn't hesitate. I didn't ask for rent, didn't ask for chores, didn't ask for anything except that she let me keep being her dad. She was my pride, my heart, the one person who made every long shift and every sore muscle worth it. Having her around again felt like the house had more warmth in it, like the air felt lighter. I'd hear her humming upstairs or laughing on the phone or rummaging through the fridge for snacks late at night, and it reminded me of when she was little. I never told her, but it made me feel less alone. But things don't stay simple forever. Trouble doesn't always kick your door in with a warning. It slips in quietly like a draft, until one day you realize everything feels colder. And the trouble in my life came wearing cheap cologne that smelled like a gas station, air freshener and confidence that looked borrowed. His name was Kyle. 20-something, tall but not in a helpful way, like his height grew faster than his character. The first time Emily brought him over, I swear the hairs on the back of my neck stood up. You know how dogs sometimes growl at people who seem perfectly normal to everybody else? That was me with this kid. Something about him didn't sit right. He shook my hand with this limp, floppy grip, like he didn't know whether to be respectful or casual. Then he grinned like he was auditioning for some role where he didn't even know the script. Within 5 minutes, he called me bro. Not sir. Not Mr. Lawson. Not Emily's dad. Bro. Now, I'm not some uptight old-timer who demands respect like a king demands tribute, but there's a certain way you talk to a man when you enter his home for the first time. And calling a 56-year-old man, whose house you're standing in, whose daughter you're dating, bro, felt like someone flicking a toothpick into my face. I didn't blow up. I didn't react. I just watched. Because sometimes watching tells you more than talking ever will. Kyle walked around my house like he was appraising it, like he was taking inventory of what he might someday claim. His shoes squeaked on the wood floor, his cheap cologne lingered behind him like a cloud, and he kept touching things, picture frames, the TV remote, the edge of the counter, as if he wanted to mark territory or get comfortable too fast. And Emily, she looked nervous, like she wanted me to like him but already knew I wouldn't. I tried to give him the benefit of the doubt. I tried to be the understanding dad who knows his daughter is growing up, but in my gut, deep down where a man's instincts live, I felt something cold settle, something unwelcoming, something warning me that this boy wasn't just a phase or a mistake waiting to happen. He was a storm forming on the horizon, one I didn't see coming fast enough. And that was the first crack in the peaceful world I thought I built. The first tiny fracture in the life that had felt steady. I didn't know it then, but that moment, Kyle calling me bro with that careless grin, was the start of everything breaking around me. The thing about trouble is, it never barges through the front door yelling. No, trouble slips in quietly, takes off its shoes, and acts like it belongs. That's exactly how Kyle moved into my life, softly, slowly, like a draft under a door you don't notice until the whole room gets cold. At first, he was just a visitor. Emily said he'd hang out for a bit, and I didn't say much. I wanted to trust her judgment. She's my daughter, my only child. I spent years teaching her to look people in the eye, to watch how they treat waiters, to pay attention to the tone under the words. But Kyle was the kind of young man who could hide his flaws behind a smile just long enough to make you doubt your own instincts. Eventually, the hangout turned into sleepover, and that turned into whole weekends, and before long there wasn't even a transition. He was just there, like a stain you suddenly notice and wonder how long it's been on your shirt. One Tuesday, I came home from a 12-hour shift, boots caked in mud, shoulders sore, stomach empty, thinking about nothing but warming up leftovers and sitting on my recliner. I walked into my own living room and stopped in the doorway. There he was, Kyle, sitting on my couch like he bought it himself, feet up on my coffee table, wearing my slippers, the old fuzzy ones Emily gave me for Father's Day years ago, and flipping through my TV channels like he was paying the bill. He had one hand buried in a family-size bag of chips I was saving for the weekend, crumbs scattered across the cushions like confetti after a cheap parade. I stared at him for a long second, that kind of long, silent stare only a father in his 50s can give, the kind that means, boy, you are 2 seconds away from learning something the hard way. He barely glanced at me, didn't even have the decency to pretend he was caught doing something wrong. I finally said, nice and slow, "Tell me, do you live here now, or are you just auditioning for the part?" He didn't miss a beat. He smirked, that lazy, disrespectful smirk young men wear when they've never been punched by life. "Emily said it's cool," he replied, like her word outranked mine in the house I built. Emily was standing in the kitchen doorway. She didn't say a thing. She didn't look at me. That's when something inside me tightened, a quiet knot of worry I'd never felt about her before. Parents know. We feel the shift before it fully hits. And I felt it right then, that slow divide forming between us, like someone wedging a crowbar under the foundation of our trust. And that someone was sitting in my slippers. From there, things escalated in ways so small and steady that by the time I saw the whole picture, it made me sick to my stomach. Kyle's stuff started appearing around the house, a hoodie on the chair, a razor in the bathroom, a phone charger plugged in behind the couch, little markers claiming territory. Then his friends began showing up. Loud kids with sideways caps, vaping in my driveway, shouting like they owned the block. They walked into my home with muddy shoes, leaving trails on my floor. They ate my food straight from the fridge, like the magnets on the door had their names instead of mine. I'd come home from work to beer cans on the counter, video game controllers thrown on the floor, the smell of cheap weed floating through the hallway like a fog machine gone wild. I'd ask Emily where all this was heading, and she'd say things like, "Dad, calm down. You're overreacting," or "Kyle, just going through a tough time." A tough time. Funny how people with tough times always seem to have endless time to sit on your couch. But the moment, the exact moment, everything truly crystallized for me came late one night. I walked down the hall because I heard voices low, hushed, the kind of whispering that never means anything good. I stopped before the doorway and listened. Kyle's voice was unmistakable. He had that nasal tone that always made sentences sound like excuses. His friend asked, "So what's the plan, man? You think he's actually gonna move out?" Kyle laughed. "Oh, he won't have a choice. Emily's already on my side. Once she gets him out, this place is basically ours." Ours? That one word hit me harder than any insult thrown in my life. Ours, like he contributed a penny. Like he knew a single thing about 30 years of sweat, broken bones, and bills paid late so Emily could have a better life. Like he owned a piece of the ground beneath his feet. I stepped back, quiet as a shadow. I didn't slam the door, didn't storm in, didn't raise my voice. Rage is easy, control is rare. And I knew right then that the smartest move wasn't yelling, it was watching. So I started observing everything. Their plans, their moods, every little shift. I noticed how Emily defended him more and more, how she flinched when I questioned anything, how he'd put his arm around her in this possessive way, whispering in her ear like he was rewiring her thoughts one sentence at a time. I'm 56, not stupid. When someone thinks they're smarter than you let them think it. You let them think they're winning. You let them talk too loud, take too much, push too far. Because people like Kyle, they're not taken down by force. They're taken down by their own ego. And all I needed to do was stay quiet. and wait for him to hand me the rope. The strange thing about betrayal is that it never arrives in one clean strike. No, betrayal starts as a whisper, a mood, a look that lasts 1 second too long. The decay begins slowly, like rust eating the bottom of a metal pipe. You don't see it until the whole thing collapses under its own weight. And that's exactly how things began to fall apart inside my house. Not in explosions, but in tiny cracks so thin I almost blamed myself for imagining them. The fights didn't arrive with screaming. They arrived with sighs. Emily began sighing at me the way strangers sigh at slow lines in the grocery store. That was the first shift. Then came the tones that clipped, annoyed tones she never used with me growing up. Suddenly, every sentence she spoke to me came with edges sharp enough to cut. I'd ask something simple, like if she needed me to pick up anything from the store, and she'd answer with this coldness, a temperature I didn't recognize coming from my own daughter. One afternoon she snapped, "Dad, don't tell me what to do," when I reminded her to lock the back door at night, something I've said since she was 12. Another evening I suggested maybe Kyle shouldn't park his car halfway on the lawn, and she shot back, "Dad, stop controlling my life." And once she called me old-fashioned, like that was some kind of illness. Old-fashioned. That one sat heavy on my chest. I didn't drink, I didn't gamble, I didn't bring women home, I didn't ask her for money. All I wanted was peace in my own home. But suddenly peace made me outdated. Suddenly boundaries made me controlling. It wasn't her voice, it was Kyle's words dripping out of her mouth. I started noticing the patterns. Whenever Kyle was around, Emily was cold. Whenever he wasn't, she was softer, almost like her old self. But the moment he stepped back into the room, she stiffened again, as if someone had flipped a switch. I wasn't fighting my daughter, I was fighting the version of her he had shaped. The day the fridge was empty, that was the first time I felt something dark crawl up my spine. I came home after a 14-hour day rewiring an old commercial building, hot attic, cramped crawl spaces, sweat soaking through my shirt, dust stuck to my arms. I was exhausted from head to toe. I opened the fridge expecting leftovers from the chicken I cooked the night before. Instead, empty shelves staring back like hollow eyes, not even a slice of bread, not a drop of milk, nothing. I shut the fridge slowly, turned around, and saw Kyle leaning against the counter, licking orange powder off his fingers from a bag of chips he hadn't bought. He looked at me with that same stupid, lazy grin. The one he always wore when he knew he was in the wrong but didn't care. I asked, "Where's all the food?" He shrugged, casual as ever. "Bro, we were hungry." Bro. If I had $1 for every time he called me bro, I could have replaced the roof, the plumbing, and still paid off a year of taxes. It was the way he said it, too, not with respect, not with friendliness, but with this arrogant tone, like we were equals, like he saw himself on my level, or worse, above it. But the real issue wasn't the missing food, it was Emily's reaction. Instead of backing me up, instead of saying even a simple "sorry, Dad, we'll replace it," she folded her arms and glared at me like I was the problem. "Dad, you're making a big deal out of nothing. Nothing. An empty fridge after a 14-hour shift was nothing. Kyle devouring groceries like termites chewing through wood was nothing." The arguments picked up speed after that, not huge shouting matches, but these sharp little confrontations filled with bitterness from her side and disbelief from mine. Every time something happened, Emily defended him. Every single time. If he left trash out, she'd say I was overreacting. If he disrespected me, she'd say I was too sensitive. If he tracked mud across the hardwood floors I spent years refinishing with my own 2 hands, she'd say, "It's not a big deal, Dad. Relax." Then Kyle started playing victim. Oh, he played it beautifully, like he had practiced in a mirror. Anytime I questioned him, he'd lower his voice, talk all gentle, look down at the floor with his fake sadness, and say things like, "I'm just trying to help Emily. I don't know why your dad hates me, babe." As if I was some old bully. As if he hadn't moved into my house rent-free. As if he wasn't slowly turning my daughter against me. But nothing, and I mean nothing, prepared me for the moment that changed everything. It was a Thursday. I remember because the sky was dark early and I had finished a job ahead of schedule. I drove home thinking maybe I'd surprise Emily with dinner from her favorite diner. Fried chicken, mashed potatoes, extra gravy. I pulled into the driveway quiet as a breeze, walked up the steps, and opened the front door gently. That's when I heard their voices from the living room. Kyle's voice first. Low, manipulative, dripping poison. He said, "Your dad's holding you back. You know that, right?" I froze, stood still in the hallway like a ghost. He continued, "Once he's out, we can turn this house into something real, something new. You deserve better. Better than the man who stayed up late building her science projects. Better than the man who worked overtime to pay her college tuition. Better than the man who ate cheap meals so she could have nice shoes. Better than the man who never missed a school event. Better than the man who dried her tears after her first heartbreak. Better than the man who raised her alone." And then came the part that broke something inside me in a way I didn't know was possible. Kyle leaned closer and said, "We just need him gone. You know I'm right." And Emily, my baby girl, she didn't argue. She didn't protest. She didn't say, "Kyle, stop." She didn't defend me. She just nodded. A small nod. Barely there, but enough to feel like someone shoved a knife into my chest and twisted it slowly. You think anger would hit first, but no. First came disbelief, that disorienting, dizzy feeling where your brain refuses to accept what your ears just heard. Then came sadness, a sadness so deep it felt like it settled into my bones. My own daughter agreeing to push me out of the home I built with sweat and sacrifice. No slap, no punch. No insult in my entire life hurt as much as that little nod. I stood there in the hallway, silent, staring at the wall while everything inside me collapsed. And in that moment, something in me changed. Something shifted. I realized this wasn't a phase. This wasn't a misunderstanding. This wasn't a fight that would blow over. This was a setup. A slow, careful setup I hadn't seen coming. And I knew the storm hadn't even started yet. A week after I overheard that conversation, a week of pretending I didn't know, a week of walking through my own house like a quiet ghost, a week of feeling my heart grow heavier every time I saw Kyle lounging on my couch or heard Emily laughing at something stupid he said, I finally decided to confront them. I didn't do it with anger. I didn't storm in. I didn't raise my voice. I came home from work one evening, wiped the dirt off my boots at the door like I always do, walked into the living room where the two of them were sprawled out like they owned the damn place, and I said in the calmest tone I could muster, "You two need to stop treating this place like you own it." I expected maybe a little guilt, maybe a moment of realization. But instead, Emily snapped her head toward me so fast it was like she'd been waiting for a fight. Her eyes were sharp, almost wild, and she shot back, "Maybe I do own it, Dad. I live here too." And the way she said it, like I was some intruder, some outsider who wandered into the wrong house, it knocked the air out of me more than I expected. I looked at her trying to steady myself and asked, "And what do you pay?" Not to be cruel, not to shame her, but to remind her gently of the reality she seemed to be rewriting in her mind. Before she could answer, Kyle stepped forward, puffing his chest out like a rooster guarding a flock he didn't raise, standing just a few inches too close to me. With that irritating fake confidence he always carried, he said, "We're not paying rent to you. That's ridiculous." There it was again, that word he kept using like it meant something, like he belonged in the same category as my daughter, like he had earned the right to put himself on the same level. It stung in a way I can't even explain. I laughed quietly, almost sadly, not because any of this was funny, but because in that moment everything snapped into focus. The manipulation, the influence, the plan. Kyle wasn't some clueless kid stumbling into trouble. He had been playing a game from the start, and somehow, piece by piece, he had managed to pull my daughter into it. Then it happened. The moment that burned itself into my memory so deeply I could still hear it echoing even when the house was silent. Emily stood up, her hands shaking, her breath uneven like she was fighting tears or rage or both. Her voice cracked at first, but then it rose full of fire, full of stubborn pride, full of something that wasn't hers. She screamed, "Get out of my house, Dad. You don't belong here anymore." For a split second, time froze. My own daughter, the girl I taught to ride a bike, the girl whose scraped knees I patched up, the girl I raised alone, the girl I worked myself half to death to support, stood there telling me to get out of a house she had never paid a dime toward. And behind her, Kyle leaned back, folded his arms, and smiled. That smile was the most honest expression he had ever shown me. A smile that said, "I won." A smile that told me he had been waiting for this moment. A smile that revealed the entire plan: push me out, manipulate Emily, claim the house, live off my work like some parasite feeding on what stronger men built. I stared at him for a long second, and for the first time I wasn't angry. I wasn't yelling. I wasn't even heartbroken anymore. I was still, completely still, because I finally saw every piece on the board. I finally understood who was playing and who was being played. I finally realized this wasn't a battle I would win with shouting matches or guilt or fatherly lectures. This was a battle I would win with patience, with silence, with strategy. So I looked at my daughter, my trembling, furious daughter, and said softly, "All right, if that's how you feel." No sarcasm, no bitterness, just acceptance. I grabbed my jacket from the hook by the door, the same hook I installed when she was 10 and wanted a place to hang her tiny pink backpack. I walked out of that house without slamming the door, without looking back, without giving Kyle the satisfaction of seeing any pain on my face. Behind me, I heard the faintest sound, maybe a laugh, maybe a sigh of relief, maybe Kyle celebrating silently that he finally pushed the old man out. They thought they won. They thought I'd roll over, sleep in my truck, vanish like a stray dog they chased off their porch. They thought they finally claimed the prize they'd been circling like vultures. But they forgot one thing, one simple, unshakable truth. My name is on every legal document connected to that house. The deed, the mortgage, the taxes, the insurance. Every brick, every beam, every room belongs to me, and I don't lose what I built, not to strangers, not to manipulators, not even to my own blood. They pushed me out, but they had no idea what door they just opened. They thought that was the end. But it was only the beginning. The night I walked out of my own house, I didn't sleep much. I lay in my truck parked near the lake, letting the cold Missouri air creep through the cracked window while my thoughts drifted like fog across the dark water. Most men would have stomped back in, demanded respect, thrown the boyfriend out by his shirt collar, maybe even yelled loud enough to shake the walls. But I'm not most men. I've lived long enough, suffered enough, and worked through enough storms to know that rage blinds you, and blind men lose battles before they even begin. So instead of letting anger chew me up, I sat there quietly, thinking, planning, remembering every detail, every word Kyle said, every shift in Emily's attitude, every smirk, every disrespect, every moment they believed they were smarter than me. And somewhere between midnight and dawn, I realized something important. They weren't just trying to push me out emotionally. They were trying to remove me legally, socially, psychologically. They wanted the house. They wanted the life I built. They wanted me erased. But they forgot who I am, a man who has spent his entire life navigating difficult jobs, stubborn clients, broken systems, and bureaucratic nightmares. I know paperwork better than most people know their own families. While other men fight with fists, I fight with signatures. So the next morning, I didn't return with rage boiling in my chest. I didn't kick down the door and demand they leave. I didn't scream or cry or beg Emily to remember who raised her. Instead, I woke up with a strange calmness, like the air right before a tornado touches down. I grabbed a hot coffee from a gas station, stretched my stiff back, and drove straight to the county office. The woman at the counter recognized me. I've wired half the buildings in that town. And when she asked what brought me in, I simply said, "I need to update a few things on my property records." She printed out the forms without question. I signed everything slowly, carefully, making sure every line was in perfect order. Once that was done, I drove to my bank and sat with a manager I've known for years. We talked about new security notes on my home loan. Then I went to my insurance provider and adjusted my policy, making sure everything reflected the exact reality. Only one legal resident, me. In less than 12 hours, the foundation of my quiet revenge was in place. I didn't throw a punch. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't even see their faces. Yet I had shifted the entire battlefield. I filed a formal declaration that no unauthorized residents were allowed in my home, which meant Kyle living there was, on paper, trespassing. I ordered a lock change authorization, not the physical locks themselves, but the permission to change them at any moment without notice. I put in a pre-report with the police, something most people don't even know exists, documenting that I had concerns about unauthorized occupancy. So if I called the police later, it wouldn't be a dispute. It would be a follow-up. And then came the final stroke. I placed a temporary freeze on all utilities for a safety inspection. It's amazing what you can legally do with a few signatures when you're the homeowner. By the time the sun dipped behind the trees that evening, everything was already set in motion. So I called Emily. My voice was soft, steady, almost sweet, the exact opposite of what she expected. "Hi, sweetheart," I said gently, as if nothing had happened, as if she didn't throw me out the day before. "Just letting you know the house will have no water, gas, or electricity for about a week. Safety checks." For a moment there was silence, that stunned silence when someone's brain is trying to catch up. And then her voice burst through the line, yelling, cursing, throwing words at me like rocks. She asked if I was crazy, if I was doing this out of spite, if I was trying to ruin her life. I stayed calm, my voice still steady, almost peaceful. Then Kyle grabbed the phone and I could hear the clumsy arrogance dripping through his words. "You can't do that, man," he barked, trying to sound authoritative, like he had even a sliver of power in the situation. I simply said, "I can," and I already did. Emily came back onto the line, her voice cracking with anger and shock. "Dad, we're living here," she screamed, as if yelling loud enough would magically rewrite the laws, the ownership documents, the mortgage statements, the title history. And that's when I spoke the line that set everything into motion, the line that separated fantasy from reality. "No, sweetheart," I said softly, "I live there. You invited someone into my home without permission." There was nothing else to say, nothing she could argue. Nothing Kyle could manipulate, so I ended it right there. I hung up the phone slowly, calmly, without an ounce of guilt in my chest, because they didn't just cross a line, they pushed me out of my own home. But now the tides had turned. They had power when I stood inside the house. I had power once I stepped outside. And this was only the beginning of what was coming. Within 48 hours, the entire fantasy they built in their heads came crashing down, louder and faster than either of them ever expected. What started as a small inconvenience quickly turned into a full-blown disaster movie, and I wasn't even there to witness it in person. But oh, the updates. The updates came flooding in through angry calls, frantic messages, and chaotic neighbor reports. The first day without utilities, Kyle tried to pretend he was still in control. He strutted around that house like some self-appointed king, trying to reassure Emily that they were fine, that they didn't need me, that real adults could handle a little inconvenience. But by the end of the first night, the act cracked like thin glass. No hot water, no fridge, no microwave humming in the corner, no lights, no air conditioning, no internet. That alone nearly killed him. The man couldn't survive 10 minutes without Wi-Fi, but somehow thought he could run a household. The second morning, reality began choking them like smoke. They couldn't shower, they couldn't cook, they couldn't heat anything. Emily tried to boil water using a candle. The whole house started to smell like burnt wax and frustration. Kyle stomped around complaining that everything was broken, as if the universe personally attacked him. He kept shouting things like, "This is sabotage, bro." The same word he used for every challenge in life, sabotage. And yes, every time he called me bro, even in those messages, I could practically hear my blood pressure rising from miles away. At one point, with sweat dripping down his forehead and frustration boiling over, he announced he was going to fix the power because, according to him, how hard can it be? That man marched into the basement with all the confidence of someone who had watched one YouTube tutorial and believed he was now an electrician. A minute later, the breaker tripped. Then again. Then a third time. each time louder than the last. The neighbors could probably hear his screams of confusion echoing through the walls. That's when he called me, the first call of many, sounding angry, desperate, and embarrassingly helpless. "Man, you need to come fix this. The power's out, we can't do anything." His voice cracked on that last word, and I almost laughed. Almost. But instead, I let silence settle for a moment. A long, patient silence that carried every ounce of the calm I had been building since the day they kicked me out. Then I said, "Not my problem, Kyle. I don't live there right now, remember." Click, I ended the call. But the universe wasn't done with them yet. Later that afternoon, the neighbors, tired of the shouting, the stomping, the door slamming, and Kyle's creative vocabulary, finally had enough. Twice, not once but twice, police cars pulled up in front of my house because the noise was so out of control. And both times, Kyle thought he could talk his way out of anything with that same fake tough guy swagger he used on teenagers at skate parks. He stepped outside, arms folded, chin up, trying to assert dominance, as he probably called it in his head. But when the officers looked down at their tablets and saw my official reports, their expressions changed instantly. Their tone shifted from neutral to authoritative in seconds. "Sir," one of the officers said slowly, clearly, firmly, "legally, you are not allowed to be here." Kyle froze, his face dropped. You could almost hear the gears in his brain grinding to a halt. Emily, standing behind him, looked like her whole world was falling apart, mascara smeared, eyes red, hands shaking. They tried explaining. They tried crying. They tried arguing. But the officers didn't budge. Rules were rules. Property owner documentation was property owner documentation. And the law sided with me. The officers told them in the most matter-of-fact tone possible that until the owner, me, returned to the property or granted written permission, both of them had to leave. Immediately. No exceptions. No loopholes. No emotional outbursts would change a thing. Kyle panicked. Emily broke down completely. Together, they begged the officers to let them stay just for tonight. But the officers repeated the same words, flat and firm. "You cannot remain inside this property." And just like that, the same girl who told me I didn't belong in my own home was standing on the front lawn with her boyfriend, watching the only roof they had left slip right out of their fingers. Every lie they believed, every plan they made, every manipulation Kyle whispered into her ears, all of it collapsed like a stack of cheap cards in the rain. Their house of confidence, gone. Their illusion of power, shattered. Their belief that they had outsmarted me, destroyed in less than 2 days. And all I did was follow the law. Rebuilding trust with your own child is nothing like patching drywall or replacing old wiring. You can't just fix it with tools and a weekend of hard work. It's slow. It's delicate. It's like trying to glue together something that cracked in a storm. If you rush, it falls apart again. If you move gently, piece by piece, it starts to hold. And that's exactly how life felt in the weeks after everything blew up, slow, careful, a little painful, but honest for the first time in a long while. We didn't try to pretend the explosion hadn't happened. We didn't act like those hurtful words were never shouted, or that Kyle never existed, or that I didn't walk out of my own house while they believed they'd won. No, we treated it like a deep bruise we both knew was there, even if we didn't touch it. We started from scratch, almost like strangers learning each other's rhythms again. The first steps were tiny, small talks, nothing heavy, nothing emotional, just little everyday conversations that slowly took the edge off the tension. A quick "how was work?" when she got home, a soft "need anything from the store?" when I was heading out. The kind of normal interactions that mean nothing on the surface but everything when you're rebuilding something broken. Dinners became shared again, slowly, cautiously. At first she'd sit across from me, quiet, nervous, picking at her food like she wasn't sure if she was allowed to relax. But over time, her shoulders dropped, her fork didn't tremble, and she'd actually talk about her day, her coworkers, The customers who drove her crazy, and those quiet car rides, those were the real turning points. No yelling, no accusations, just the hum of the engine, the flicker of traffic lights hitting the dashboard, and the kind of silence that slowly turns warm instead of cold. She found a job not long after everything went down, a real job, stable hours, decent pay, something she wanted to do, not something Kyle pushed her toward. I was proud of her, even if I didn't say it out loud right away. When she came home holding that first paycheck, she stood in the doorway of the living room with this awkward, shy determination on her face and said she wanted to contribute. She wanted to pay a little rent. It wasn't about money, and she knew it. It was about responsibility, about showing she could stand on her own 2 feet, about making things right. I didn't ask her for a dime, never planned to, never needed to, but the fact that it was her idea mattered. So I let her. Not because I needed the help, but because she needed the feeling of stepping into adulthood without anyone manipulating her. She even started helping with groceries, surprising me by coming home with things she remembered I liked, my favorite brand of coffee, the cornbread mix I always grabbed, the peanut butter I'd eaten since she was a kid. She would place the bags on the counter and say, "Got a little extra, thought I'd help out." No big speeches, no dramatic gestures, just quiet, honest effort. Slowly, painfully slowly, but beautifully slowly, the house began to feel like a home again. The chaos faded, the tension dissolved, the air didn't feel heavy anymore. I could sit in my chair without bracing myself for shouting. She could walk through the front door without shrinking or second-guessing everything she said. The walls that once echoed with arguments now held soft laughter again. The kind that bubbles up in the middle of simple conversations, the kind that sneaks out before you even realize you're laughing. But healing isn't a straight line. Some days she'd apologize again out of nowhere, folding laundry, washing dishes, passing by my chair, her voice small and trembling as she said, "I'm still so sorry, Dad. I don't know what I was thinking." And every time I'd pause, look her in the eyes, and tell her what I'd been telling myself since the day she broke down in the living room. We move forward, not backward. I said it gently but firmly, not to dismiss her guilt, not to pretend nothing happened, but to remind her that the only way to rebuild a bridge is to walk across it, not stand staring at the burnt pieces. Every time I said it, she breathed a little easier, stood a little taller, let go of a little more of the shame she was carrying. And as for me, those words weren't just for her, they were for me too. Because forgiving your child takes strength, the kind that doesn't come from pride or anger, but from love that refuses to die. And that love, it was finally growing again. Time has a way of settling dust, revealing the truths we couldn't see when everything was loud and chaotic. Months passed, real calm months, the kind where the house smelled like fresh coffee in the morning again, where Emily hummed while doing laundry, where we argued about normal things like who forgot to take out the trash instead of who belonged in the house. Life smoothed itself out slowly, naturally, the way a river clears after a storm. And then one evening, out of nowhere, the past walked right back into our kitchen wrapped in the sound of Emily's laughter. The real kind, the kind that shakes your shoulders and steals your breath for a second. She came home from work, tossed her bag on the counter and leaned against the doorframe with this look on her face, a mixture of shock, disbelief and, well, satisfaction. "Dad," she said, struggling not to burst into giggles, "you will not believe where Kyle ended up." I raised an eyebrow, not because I cared, I honestly barely thought about the kid anymore, but because her reaction told me this was going to be good. Then she said the words, half laughing, half in tears from trying so hard not to laugh too hard. Through her friends, she'd heard that Kyle was now living in some cramped, dingy basement apartment on the other side of town, the kind where the single flickering light bulb in the hallway costs more electricity than the entire rent he was scraping together. He had 3 roommates, all of them equally lost, equally broke, equally wrapped in the illusion that life owed them something. And apparently, he'd been telling anyone who would listen that some old guy ruined his life. She wasn't laughing at him out of cruelty. She wasn't celebrating someone's downfall. It was more like this surreal moment where all the fog lifted, and she finally saw the difference between a man who builds and a boy who takes. She laughed through tears, wiping her face as she told me, "Daddy, he actually thinks you ruined his life." I didn't laugh, I didn't smirk, I didn't gloat. I simply said, in the calmest tone I've ever used, "I didn't ruin it, I just stopped him from ruining ours." And that was as real as it gets. That wasn't revenge. That was protection. That was a father doing what fathers do, drawing a line, standing strong, refusing to hand over the life he built to someone who hadn't earned a single piece of it. Because here's the truth people don't like to admit. Revenge isn't always loud. It isn't always dramatic. It isn't fireworks or shouting or slamming doors. Sometimes revenge is nothing more than stepping out of someone's way and letting gravity take over, letting their own choices, their greed, their laziness, their lies, drag them exactly where they were headed all along. Kyle didn't fall because I pushed him. Kyle fell because he climbed onto a pedestal made out of his own ego, and when the truth hit, it knocked him over like a breeze. Meanwhile, Emily grew, not just older but wiser, grounded, compassionate in ways she never had to be before. She learned who was actually in her corner. Not the slick talker who fed her dreams only to sponge off her future. Not the kid who tried to turn my home into his personal launch pad for a life he never intended to build. But the old man, me, who spent decades working, saving, sacrificing, building something real, something stable, something that could outlast storms. The man who drove her to school in the rain, who fixed her first car, who stayed up nights making sure she had a home to return to. She learned the difference between someone who speaks well and someone who shows up. And the moment that sealed everything, the moment that made every quiet piece of my revenge worth it, came on a Sunday morning while I was fixing the loose hinge on the back door. She walked out onto the porch, sat beside me, watched me work for a minute without saying a word. The sun was warm, the birds were loud, and the world felt simple again. Then, out of nowhere, she leaned her head on my shoulder the same way she did as a kid when she was scared of thunderstorms. She whispered, soft enough that I almost didn't hear it, "Dad, thank you for not giving up on me." And let me tell you, there isn't a revenge in this world sweeter than that. Not seeing Kyle fail, not getting the house back, not the paperwork or the power or the justice. The real victory was hearing my daughter say those words with a heart full of honesty. Because at the end of all this, the betrayal, the manipulation, the lies, the heartbreak, what mattered most wasn't punishing anyone. It was saving the relationship that mattered more to me than any house, any title, any pride. And in that moment, with her head on my shoulder and the world quiet for the first time in a long time, I realized something I wish more people understood. The greatest revenge is healing what they tried to break.